Alright, hello everyone. I hope you guys are doing good. So today I'll be discussing the solutions to Codeforce's educational round 118, and this round was held yesterday. Talking about the difficulty levels, first of all, this round was kind of imbalanced. The first two problems were good enough, but problem C was a bit easier based on its position, and then after problem C there was this huge difficulty gap, and the difficulty gap between C and D was like very large. But the round would have been much better if problem E was placed before problem D, since undoubtedly it is easier than D. And if it was placed before D, then I'm sure the number of solves to problem E would also have been much more, right? But the difficulty was not very high, but the balance was not good in this round. That's my opinion. Hmm? So yeah, today I'll be discussing the solutions to the first 5 problems from A to E. So yeah, let's get started with problem A. Let's see what this problem has to say. So we have we have two numbers written on a whiteboard, and both numbers have a specific format, that is a positive integer x and p zeros appended to its end. And we want to tell which number is bigger. Well, this is the only problem at hand. So we'll be given with 4 integers x1, p1, x2, p2, and the first number is formed by putting x1 and then p1 zeros to the right of it, and similarly the second number is formed by putting x2 and then p2 zeros to the right of it. But the thing is that both x1 and x2 are small, but p1 and p2 are large. What that means is that the number of zeros are large, so we can't just compare them just like that, and that's the problem. So we need to figure out a way to compare them, given that the number of zeros can be huge. It's not really that hard, and it'll be much better if I explain it to you through the help of my code. So let's see what I'm doing here. So first of all, I'm taking the input of x1, p1, x2, and p2, and then the length of the first number will be x1 dot size plus p1. I'm taking x1 and x2 as strings. That just makes my life easier. And I'm taking p1 and p2 as numbers, right? So yeah. So the length of the first number is going to be x1 dot size plus p1, and the length of the second number is going to be x2 dot size plus p2. And obviously, first things first is that if their lengths are not same, then the number whose length is bigger, right? So if len1 is greater than len2, then this is the answer, and if len2 is greater than len1, then this is the answer. That's done. Now the only case which is concerned is that the length of both the numbers is the same. So in that case, let's see what we can do. So then what I'm doing is that I am somehow manipulating the numbers such that their lengths become the same. And then what I'm doing is that I'm just looking at x1 and x2, and if x1 is smaller than x2, then I'm appending x2 minus x1 zeros to the end of x1. And similarly, if x2 is greater than x1, if the size of x2 is greater than the size of x1, then I'm appending x2 minus x1 zeros to the right of x1. And if the size of x1 is greater than x2, then I'm appending x1 minus x2 zeros to the right of x2. And once I do that, the sizes of x1 and x2 just become the same, and then I can easily compare them. Now, because I know that both x1 and x2 have the same size and the length of both the numbers is the same, so the number of zeros is also the same. And if the number of zeros at the end is the same, then I can just discard those zeros. So then I just have to compare x1 and x2, and that can be easily done by just using the compare function in C++ as well. But I don't know in the context why I wrote this compare function from scratch. So yeah, now x1 and x2 both are the same. Both the length of both of them are the same, and the number of zeros to the end is also the same. So you can just discard the zeros and compare x1 and x2. So if you find I where x1 of I is greater than x2 of I, then the first number is bigger. Otherwise, if you find a position where x2 of I is greater than x1 of I, then the second number is bigger. But if both of them are the same, then the answer is equal, right? So this pretty much sums it up. Uh, this was just implementation. You don't have to think anything in this problem. So this completes the solution to problem A. Right. Let's move to the next problem, problem B. Let's see what this has to say. Again, this is not a very difficult problem. So we have a sequence of n integers, a1, a2 up till an, and the thing to notice is that they are just pairwise distinct positive integers. So no element occurs twice in this sequence. That's a thing to notice. So we have to find n by 2 different pairs of integers x and y such that x is not equal to y both x and y are from A, and x mod y is not present in A. These are the three conditions that we need to satisfy, and we need to find n by 2 such different pairs. I mean, we need to find the greatest integer of n by 2 different pairs, and the meaning of pairs being different is that both x and y cannot be same in two pairs. However, x can be same in two pairs, y can be same in two pairs, but not both x and y, right? So yeah, we need to find such n by 2 pairs, and they have already stated that it is always possible to find such a solution, and the reason for that is that all the numbers are pairwise distinct. So let's see how to solve this problem. So we need to find n by 2 pairs of the form x comma y such that both x and y are from A, but x mod y is not from A. That's the only condition that we need to satisfy. Obviously, x cannot be equal to y, that is also one condition, and since all the numbers are pairwise distinct, it basically means we need to select two indices such that ai and aj, such that ai mod aj is not in the sequence A. That's what we want. And the main observation here is that we know that for any two numbers x and y, x mod y is always less than y, right? Because x mod y can belong to 0 to y minus 1. This is just basic mathematics, because if you take the remainder from any number y, then that remainder belongs to 0 to y minus 1, obviously, right? So the observation that we have here is that if we pick y to be the smallest number of the array, then the remainder will always lie between 0 to the smallest element minus 1. And since we are picking the smallest element, there will be no element in the array which will be in the range from 0 to smallest element minus 1. So the main observation is that we can always choose y to be the smallest element of the sequence, and that way the remainder will belong to 0 to the smallest element minus 1, and the smallest element minus 1 is obviously not present in the sequence since it will be smaller than the smallest element. And so this sums it up. We can always pick y to be the smallest element and then just pick arbitrary n by 2 elements such that none of them is equal to the smallest element, and that will just do our job. So yeah, this is the solution. Let's just have a quick look at the code for better understanding. So what I'm doing is I am first sorting the array so that the smallest element is at index number 1, and then I'm going from 2 to n. I'm incrementing my count, and after that my answer will be a of I and a of 1, where I'm taking x to be a of I and y to be a of 1. Since y is a of 1, the remainder will always be less than a of 1, and there is no number in the sequence which is less than a of 1, so the third condition is satisfied automatically. And once I find out that my count is equal to n by 2, I have to break out since I only have to print n by 2 pairs. So yeah, this is the solution to problem B, and that's it. Let's move on to the next problem. Problem C. Again, it is a bit easy for its position. You expect a normal problem C to be a bit difficult. This problem was like very obvious. If you look at this problem, if you read it carefully, then the idea will just come to you in just by reading this problem. That's the thing here. That's why this problem is regarded as an easy one. So let's see what's happening here. So essentially in this problem there is a monster which you have to kill, and the battle which you are battling a monster, and the battle is basically lasting for an infinite amount of time, that is 100 raised to the power 500. It's basically infinity. So the time of the battle is infinity, and you have been given with the liberty to inflict n attacks on the dragon, and the ith attack is being performed at t is equals to ai. So you have been given with the sequence ai, and there are n attacks that you can perform, and the ith attack is performed at t is equals to ai, where t is the time. And then what happens is that once you start the ith attack, then the ith attack will last for k seconds until and unless it arrives at a situation where the next attack is happening. So basically what I'm trying to say here is that if k is equals to 4 and you are attacking at 2, 4 and 10 seconds, then your first attack happens at t is equals to 2, and if this 4 was not present, then the first attack would go on till t is equals to 5, because you will attack for t is equals to 2, 3, 4 and 5 seconds. But since there is a new attack starting at t is equals to 4, the previous attack will be discarded, and then after that the new attack will start at t is equals to 4, and it will last for 4 seconds, so it is going to end at t is equals to 7. And then from time is equals to 8 and 9, there will be no attack, and at t is equals to 10, the last attack will start, which will again last for 4 seconds. And basically in 1 second you are dealing exactly 1 damage. That is also an information which is given to you, right? So yeah, this is the scenario. I hope it's clear enough what's going on in this problem. And finally, the value k is not given to you, and this is your job. You need to find the minimum possible value of k, such that after all the attacks are completed, you have killed the dragon completely. And the dragon has h damage points, so you need to inflict a damage of at least h to kill the dragon. And to do that, you need to find the minimum possible value of k, such that after all the attacks are finished, you have surely killed the dragon. Okay, let's see how to solve this problem. So the main observation here again is that if we have a particular value of k, it is very easy to determine whether we have killed the dragon or not after the n operations. So the observation is, if we know a value of k, then it is easy to determine that after the end of all the attacks, whether we have killed the dragon or not. Then it is easy to determine whether we have killed the dragon or not after all the n attacks. Well, the algorithm is pretty simple. Basically, you just have to simulate it. Since the value of n is up to 100, that's not a big issue for you. So you essentially just have to simulate the entire process. And if you simulate the process, you can easily find out what is the damage that you did to the dragon. And then it is easy to determine whether the damage is greater than h or not. If it is greater than h, then that means you have killed him. Otherwise, you have not killed him. And yeah, so basically if you know a particular value of k, then it is easy to determine whether you have killed the dragon or not. And since you need to find out the first value of k, then the idea which comes to mind is to use binary search, right? Because the checker function is pretty easy here. For any value of k, we can easily check whether the value of k is good or not. And the situation is something like this. It is something like this: false, 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 true, 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 right? So in situations like this, it is pretty easy to see what we do. We will just do a binary search, and this checker function is very easily available for us, because we can just simulate the process to find out whether for a particular value of k we have killed the dragon or not. And we need to find this index of the first truth. So we need to find the index of the first true value, and this is a classic example of a binary search for answer problem. So yeah, we can do a binary search for answer and find out this minimum value of k, which will guarantee that we have killed the dragon. And the algorithm to determine whether a particular value of k is enough or not is that you just basically simulate the process. And by simulating the process, what I mean is that you have the value of k with you, and you have the sorted array a with you as well. So you just start inflicting a damage of k from a of I, and if you don't encounter a of I plus 1 and your k gets finished, then the damage inflicted will be k. Otherwise, the damage inflicted will be a of I plus 1 minus a of I. So what I'm trying to say is, if you are at a particular value of I, if a of I plus 1, so if a of I plus 1 minus a of I is greater than k, then damage inflicted by the ith attack is equals to k. Otherwise your ith attack is still in progress, and it has not yet finished, but the I plus 1th attack has started. So then the damage is going to be a of I plus 1 minus a of I. So the damage inflicted by the ith attack is going to be a of I plus 1 minus a of I. And essentially the damage is nothing but minimum of a of I plus 1 minus a of I comma k. Pretty easy to see why this is happening. So yeah, using this algorithm you can find the total damage, and if that total damage is greater than or equals to h or not. If it is greater than equals to h, then you will return true, otherwise you will return false. And using this checker function you can just binary search for answer. So let's just have a look at the code for clarity. So yeah, basically I am doing a binary search. L is equals to 0 and R is equals to a very large number, and the invariant which I'm maintaining here is that L is always bad, so L is always false and R is always true. And basically I'm just left with the task of maintaining the invariant, so I do mid is equals to L plus R by 2, and then what I'm doing is I am incrementing my damage which is hit by minimum of a of I minus a of I minus 1 comma mid, and at the end I will also have to increase my hit by mid, because that is the damage that will be done with the last attack. And so if that hit is greater than or equals to h, then basically I'm good, so I'll just return true. And if it is okay, then I'll do R is equals to mid, because I'm always maintaining the invariant that R is always true, and otherwise I'll do L is equals to mid. And since I had to output the I had to output the minimum value which is true, I'm going to output R, and that will do my job. So yeah, this completes the solution to problem C. And now let's move on to the more interesting and difficult problems. So let's start with problem D. And one thing that I would like to say here is that definitely this problem is harder than problem D for sure. During the contest itself, I spent around 40 minutes trying to come up with an idea to problem D. I got a bit close, but I could not actually implement the idea. So I quickly moved on to problem E and realized that it is much simpler, and I regret not solving E before D. So the contest would have been very well balanced if problem E was before problem D. That's one thing. But anyways, let's start with the solution to problem D. So a sequence of integers x1, x2 up till xk is called max correct if for all I from 1 to k this particular condition is being satisfied. And this condition says that the absolute value of the difference between xi minus the max of the prefix from 1 to I is less than or equals to 1, where max is a very standard term in comparative programming, and max of a sequence of numbers is just the minimum non-negative integer which is not present in that sequence. And for example, the max of 1013 is 2, because the minimum number which is not present in the sequence is 2. Since 0 and 1 are already present, 2 is the number which is not present. And if the sequence is like this 215, then the minimum non-negative number which is not present in it is 0, because 0 is not present here, right? If I add a 0 to this sequence, then it becomes 2150. In that case, it has 0, 1 and 2. So the minimum number which is not present becomes 3, and so the max of that sequence becomes 3. So that's the definition of max. And a max correct sequence is a sequence for which for all I from 1 to k, the absolute value of the difference between the ith element and the max of the prefix from 1 to I is less than or equals to 1. And we have an array of n non-negative integers, and we need to determine the total number of non-empty max correct subsequence of that array, and we need to output it modulo this huge prime number. Alright, so another thing to notice here is that all the numbers are from 0 to n. That might be helpful for us. So yeah, let's start with some observation and see how we can solve this problem. So let's try to see how our sequence is going to look like. So first of all, let's try to see how a max correct sequence looks like. Now the sequence is going to look like something this. So one thing to notice is that the sequence can never start with a number which is greater than 2, and that's because if I start with 2, then the max of the first prefix is just going to be 0, and the number here is 2, and their difference is surely greater than 1. So I can't start with a number which is greater than 2, like 2, 3, 4, 5 or anything like that. So I have to start with either 0 or 1. Okay, why? Because if I start with 0, then my max is 1, and 1 minus 0 is less than equals to 1. And if I start with 1, then my max is 0. Similarly, 1 minus 0 is less than equals to 1. So, so one thing is sure that I'll start with either 0 or 1. So let's say I start with 0 and I use some zeros and some I can use either 1, 2, 3 or some amount of zeros. That's up to me. So since I'm using only zeros, the condition of being max correct is being satisfied for each prefix, since the max is always 1 and the element is always 0, and 1 minus 0 is less than equals to 1. Okay, now I decide to stop using zeros and I use something else. Again, I can't use 2 here because the moment again I can use either 1 or 2 here, and that's because if I use a 3 here, then the max becomes 1, and again the difference of 3 and 1 is greater than 1, so I can't use any number which is greater than 2 here, right? So let's say I decide to use 1 here, and then I will use some amount of 1s, and now I decide that no, I'm not using 1s anymore. And then what happens is that now I can't go back to 0, and the reason for that is that if I put a 0 here, then the max becomes 2, and I'm not allowed to do that because 2 minus 0 is greater than 1. So I can't use a 0 here, and I've decided not to use a 1 here. But what about 2? If I use the 2 here, then the max is 3 and the number is 2, which is good. So I can use a 2. What if I try to use a 3 here? Again, the max is 2 and the number is 3, which is good enough. But I can't use a 4 because if I use a 4, then the max becomes 2 and the number is 4. So let's say I decide to use a 2 here. And I can use a similar argument that now if I decide to stop using 2s, I can either use a 3 or a 4. So let's say I decide to use a 3 here. And now again, when I'm at 3 and I decide to stop using 3s, then I can use either a 4 or a 5. So let's say this is the point where I stop using consecutive integers and I skip one number. So I'm going to skip 4 and I'm going to use 5. And this is allowed because the max is 4 and 5 minus 4 is less than equals to 1, which is not a problem. So this is the point where I skip. So I essentially skip 4 and I jump back to 5. I jump right to 5. Now, now the interesting thing which happens here is that as soon as I skip 4, the max becomes fixed to 4 because I haven't used 4 here, right? Now let's see what happens. So the thing is that now I have used 5 and let's see what numbers I can put next. Can I put a 0? No, because the max is 4 and 4 minus 0 is greater than 1. Similarly, I can't put a 1 because 4 minus 1 is greater than 1. I can't put a 2 because 4 minus 2 is greater than 1. But I can put a 3 because 4 minus 3 is less than equals to 1. Similarly, if I try to put a 4, then the max will become 6 because I have all the numbers from 0 to 5. And so 6 minus 4 is greater than 1. So I can't use a 4. What about a 5? Obviously, a 5 was initially there, so I can put a 5 here. But I cannot put a number which is greater than 5 because the max is fixed to be 4. And if I put a number which is greater than 5, then the difference between them will exceed 1. So the only two numbers which I can put here after the 5 are either a 3 or a 5. And let's say I decide to put a 5, and then again it is a absolutely similar situation. So I can again put a 3 or a 5. So let's say I try to put a 3 here, and this is basically just going to continue. I can either put 5 or 3s indefinitely because the max is fixed to be 4. And I can never change the max now because if I put a 4, then the max becomes 6 and then the condition will be violated. And if I don't put a 4, then the max will be fixed to 4. And if the max is fixed to 4, then the only two numbers which I'm allowed to use are 3 and 5 because that is the only way the difference between the max and the number is not going to exceed 1, right? So that's the main observation here. So the structure of the sequence will be something like this. I start with a 0. Maybe I don't start with a 0 and I start with a 1, but without loss of generality, let's say I start with a 0 and then I use some 1s and then I use some 2s, and then let's say I use some consecutive numbers and then I use some k's, and let's say that after k I decide to skip a number, and as soon as I skip a number I know that my max becomes fixed. So after this I skip k plus 1. So once I skip k plus 1, my max becomes fixed. It will always be k plus 1. So since my max is k plus 1, I am only allowed to use either k plus 2 or k, and I am allowed to put either k plus 2 or k, and that's my choice. So then this will just continue. I can only put k plus 2 or k here. Since the max is fixed to be k plus 1, the only two numbers which I am allowed to use now are k plus 2 or k. So this will just continue. I'll be putting k plus 2 or k, and this is just going to continue indefinitely. So this is basically what the structure of the sequence is going to look like. I will start with zeros, and then I will put some ones, I'll put some twos, and up till a particular value k, I don't decide to skip any number and I choose consecutive numbers. But after a particular value k, I decide to skip k plus 1. And once I decide to skip k plus 1, then I'm only allowed to use either k plus 2s or k's, because that is the only way I'll be able to satisfy this condition that the difference between the number and their max is less than or equal to 1. I hope this makes sense to everyone. So if I try to start the sequence with 1, then that just means that I have already skipped 0. And if I start the sequence with 1, then then what that means is I have already skipped k plus 1, where k plus 1 is going to be 0. I hope you get the idea. Basically, I'm skipping 0. So I'm only allowed to put k plus 2 or k. Then k plus 2 will be 1 and k will be minus 1. Since I don't have the liberty to use minus 1s, if I start the sequence with 1s, then it is just going to be a bunch of 1s. Right? Okay. So essentially, the sequence is divided into two parts. So a max correct sequence is divided into two parts. So one is before the skip and one is after the skip. And what you can see here is that before the skip, I am using consecutive numbers, some zeros, some ones, some twos. But after the skip, I am only allowed to use two numbers, which are either k plus 1, either k plus 2 or k. Cool. So it turns out that these class of problems are not very new to us. There have been contests where such problems have been asked, and the way to do such problems is to use dynamic programming. And what we do here is that, first of all, we will use dynamic programming. And what we do here is that in such situations where the sequence is divided into two parts, where something is happening in the first part or something is happening in the second part, and sometimes there are also more than two parts, so those are handled separately. But the main idea is that in all such problems, we use dynamic programming, where the number of states in the dynamic programming is first of all the index which we are at, and the second state is going to be the part which we are at. And here, since there are only two parts, the second state is going to be either the first part or the second part. Essentially, similarly, if there would have been more than two parts to the sequence, then we would have changed the state of the DP accordingly. That is, the first dimension would store the index and the second dimension would store 3, where 3 is the number of parts. But here, since the number of parts is 2, what we can do is we will take a 2D DP array, and instead of a 2D DP array, we can use two DP arrays. So DP1 and DP2. And let's say what these values will signify. So now pay very clear attention to what is happening here. So what I'm doing is DP1 of I is the number of max correct subsequences. So the number of max correct subsequences such that max of the subsequence is I, and it is in the first part. Basically, it ends in the first part. That's what DP1 is representing. And if you look at DP2 of I, then the definition is just the same. It's just that now it's going to end in the second part. That's the only difference here. So for DP2 of I, it's so DP2 of I is the number of subsequences which end at the second part, and they are max correct subsequences, and the max of the subsequence is I. So It is the number of max correct subsequences such that the max of the subsequence is I and it ends in the second part. Right? So there is this transition point where I transition from k to k plus 2 directly. So basically dp1 of I is saying that my max is equals to I, but I have not yet transitioned. That is, I have not yet skipped any number. And dp2 of I is saying that my max is equals to I and I am a max correct subsequence, but I have actually transitioned and I have been through this skipping part. So that means I have skipped from k to k plus 2. And this is a pretty standard practice, and there have been problems in previous contests where this particular idea has come to effect. So this is not something which is very new. So yeah, now let's look at the transitions, and since I know that the structure is going to be like this, the transitions are not very hard to see. Let's see how we will do transitions. So one thing is that if I am talking about an index I, then the number at that sequence, the number at that index is a of I, right? And if the subsequence is ending at a of I, then its max will be either a of I minus 1 or a of I plus 1, right? So let's look at the transitions now. So I am at index I in the sequence. So the number which I have is a of I, and I need to calculate dp1 of a of I and dp2 of a of I. But essentially what's going to happen is that if I'm ending at the ith number, that is if I'm ending at a of I, then the max of any max correct subsequence will either be a of I minus 1 or a of I plus 1, because the subsequence has to be max correct, and the condition for being max correct is this, and so the max value of that subsequence will either be a of I minus 1 or will be a of I plus 1. So first thing is that let's look at the case when the max is a of I plus 1. The max is a of I minus 1. So case 1 is when max is equals to a of I minus 1. Now, if max is equals to a of I minus 1, let's see what happens. So the first thing that you will notice is that if you have not yet skipped anything, that is, if you have been using consecutive numbers, let's say you are at a 2, then you know that your max is equals to 3. That is, your max is equals to a of I plus 1. It is not possible that you haven't skipped anything and yet your max is a of I minus 1. Because if you haven't skipped anything and you are putting a of I, then that just means that you have all the numbers from 0 to ai minus 1 already taken, and so the max will always be a of I plus 1. So the first thing is that if your max is happening to be a of I minus 1, then it is only possible when you have actually skipped and something and you have made the transition. So dp1 of a of I minus 1 will not be affected. The only thing which will be affected will be dp2 of a of I minus 1. So dp2 of a of I minus 1 is going to be affected. And how is it going to be affected? Let's see that. So dp2 of a of I minus 1. So if I'm putting a k plus 2, then I know that my max is k plus 1 since I have skipped k plus 1. And that means if I take a of I as k plus 2, then my max is going to be a of I minus 1. And that can happen either I have already transitioned or I am transitioning in the beginning. What I'm trying to say is that I have not yet transitioned and then I put a k plus 2 here. And the number of ways to do that is dp1 of a of I minus 1. So basically what I'm trying to say here is that I am starting my transition here. That is, I have not yet transitioned and I have reached a value k, and then I skip k plus 1 and then I move on to k plus 2. My max will be k plus 1, which is a of I minus 1. And so the number of ways to do that will be dp1 of a of I minus 1. And there is another case, and that is that I have already transitioned and I'm continuing from my transition. So what that means is that I have transitioned, and once I have transitioned, my max becomes fixed to k plus 1, and k plus 1 is a of I minus 1, and all those subsequences are already good, and it is my choice to either append ai or not to the end. So basically for all these subsequences I have two choices, either to append a of I to the end or to not append a of I to the end, and that will lead to 2 times dp2 of a of I minus 1. So this is not very clear why this is happening, but I'm sure you will get the idea of what I'm doing if you try to watch this video 2-3 more times. This is a very standard, this is kind of a standard trick, but a lot of people don't know about it, so it might be difficult to understand what I'm trying to do here. So I'll just repeat what's happening here. So I'm taking the case when the max is equals to a of I minus 1. And if the max is equals to a of I minus 1, then the number of then I'm trying to find out the number of subsequences the number of max correct subsequences whose max is a of I minus 1. And first of all, it is only possible when I have already transitioned. And when I have already transitioned, what's happening is that I am putting a of I towards the end. So I can put a of I towards the end from the beginning when I have not yet transitioned, and the number of ways to do that is dp1 of a of I minus 1. And the other choice that I have is that I put a of I when I have already transitioned, and the number of ways to do that is dp2 of a of I minus 1. But since all the subsequences where I have already transitioned and my max is a of I minus 1, they're already good. It's my choice to either put ai or not to the end of that. So the number of ways becomes 2 times dp2 of a of I minus 1. Okay, great. I hope it is clear. And case 2 is when max is equals to a of I plus 1. Now, this case is further divided into 2 cases, subcase 1 and subcase 2. Now, in this case, what's happening is that, first of all, what we noticed in this case of max is equals to ai minus 1 is that it is only possible when I have already transitioned. But it turns out that max is equals to ai plus 1 is possible when I have not yet transitioned, or also when I have transitioned. And that is why these are 2 subcases. So the first subcase is that I have not yet transitioned, and that means I'm trying to find out dp1 of a of I plus 1. And that is possible when I'm extending my max from a of I. That is, my previous max was a of I and I put an a of I, so the max becomes a of I plus 1. So the number of ways to do that is dp1 of a of I. This is pretty easy to understand. And the second case is that my max is already a of I plus 1. And in this case, I have a choice of either putting a of I or not to the end, right? So then I will multiply by 2 the number of ways of dp1 of a of I plus 1. So what that means is that my max was already a of I plus 1, and now it's my choice to either put it or not put it, right? Yeah, so I hope it makes sense. So this is what is happening here. Alright, so yeah, now the other case is that I have transitioned and my max is equals to dp1 of a of I plus 1. And as you can notice here, the only way to do that is to look at already transitioned subsequences whose max is a of I plus 1. And basically what I'm trying to say is that I need to find out the value of dp2 of a of I plus 1. And for that, I can only come from those sequences where I have already transitioned and my max is a of I plus 1. And after that, it's my choice to put a of I towards the end or not. And so the number of subsequences will then become dp2 of a of I plus 1 into 2. So these are all the transitions that you need to do here. And this is basically it. If you do this, then you will get to the answer. The main thing is to try to understand what these dp states are representing. And if you understand exactly what these states are representing, then coming up with these transitions is not difficult. I'm sure a lot of you will have trouble understanding how exactly these transitions are working. And I can guarantee you that if you understand what these dp states are representing, then these transitions are not that unnatural. And yeah, so basically this is it for problem D. It is a bit tricky, and I know some of you guys must have not understood it, but this is how we need to do it. The states are like this, and you need to understand what the states are representing. dp1 of I is representing the number of max correct subsequences such that the max of the sequence is I, and I have not yet skipped any number. Similarly, dp2 of I represents that the max correct number of max correct subsequences whose max is I, but I have made the transition, that is, I have already skipped. And I have skipped means that I am at the second part. This is part 1 and this is part 2. And then if you understand the state, then these transitions are not very unnatural. And now the final answer. Since I need to find all the max correct subsequences, which is just sum of dp, it is sum of dp1 of I plus dp2 of I for all I from 0 to n plus 1. That's it. This completes the solution to problem D. Let's have a look at the code now. So yeah, the code is not very code here is not very messy, although it is possible to make the code very messy. But the good thing that I'm doing here is that in the problem it is mentioned that you don't have to count the empty subsequence. But a trick to avoid messy code in such problems is that you first count the empty subsequence and you at the end you just remove that, and that just makes your life easier. So the base case is that dp1 of 0 is equals to 1. That is, I have not yet transitioned and it's my empty sequence, and if I have an empty sequence, obviously its max is going to be 0. So then dp1 of 0 is equals to 1, and then I go from 1 to n and I do the transitions as I had mentioned. These are the exact same thing which I have written above. So this is what's happening, and finally I just add all the dp values from 0 to n plus 1, and then I subtract 1 because I don't need to include the empty subsequence. And finally I have my answer ready with me, and I output it, and this completes the solution to problem D. I understand this is a very difficult problem, but I assure you that if you watch this video 2 or 3 times and you think carefully about what the DP states are representing, you will be able to actually get what I'm trying to tell here, right? So yeah, this completes the solution to problem D. Let's now move on to the next one, and the last problem which we'll be representing today, problem E. So this is for sure an easier problem than D, so it shouldn't take much time. And let's see what the problem is saying. So we have a grid consisting of n rows and m columns, and each cell of the grid is either free or blocked, standard stuff. And we have one cell which contains a lab. And what happens is that there is a robot, and the robot has gone crazy. And if it is at some free cell and you command it to go somewhere, you can give 4 types of commands, that is to move up, down, left and right. Again, pretty standard. But what happens here is that the robot is not going to follow your command, and he has gone crazy. That means that he will do anything but following your command. And what that means is that if you command him to move up, then he will try to move anywhere else but up. And if there is any free place to move other than the direction which you commanded him to go, he will move there. If there are multiple places to go, he will move anywhere else. But the command that you gave, that is not going to be followed by the robot. So that's what the robot is doing. And what we need to do is that for each of the starting point, that is, I can make the robot start from any of the cells. I have n into m cells, so I can make the robot start from any of those cells, and I need to determine whether it is possible to give a chain of commands to the robot such that no matter what the robot does, he will end up reaching the lab. That's the end goal, right? So I need to output yes or no for each starting cell, whether it is possible to force the robot into the lab or not. Well, this is the entire problem, and the thing is that this is not very difficult to see. The solution here is not very difficult to see. Let's see what's going on. Okay, now what happens is that the robot is going to move to any direction other than the one it is commanded to go. So let's try to analyze the situation. And basically we have a lab which is L, and some things are surrounding it, right? So let's look at the surrounding cells of the lab. So the lab is going to look something like this. So there are 4 cells which are surrounding the lab, and let's just assume that all of them are free cells. So it's going to look something like this. So all of these cells are free cells and are surrounding the lab. And obviously if the robot is getting forced into the lab, then he will come from one of these 4 cells, right? So let's try to analyze what happens at this cell. So what is happening here is that at this particular cell, I want to answer whether it is possible or not that the robot is at this cell, and I give him a particular command and he is forced to move left, because if he moves to the left, then he will reach the lab, right? Well, first of all, let's say that all the cells which are adjacent to this cell are also free. So these cells are also free. So now if I start from this cell and I give a command of going to the left, then obviously he will not go left. if I give the command to go up, then he can go anywhere. Like he can go left, but it is also possible for him to go down or right. So there is no guarantee, right? Similarly, if I give him any command, there is no guarantee that he will end up in the lab, right? So for this particular starting cell, the answer is going to be no. But let's say I make one of its cells as blocked. And now again there is no guarantee. If I try to command him to go up, he can either go left or go down. But it's not a guarantee that he will go left only, right? But let's say I make another of its neighboring cell blocked. And now it becomes interesting, because now if I command him to go up, it is guaranteed that he will go left. And that is exactly what I want, right? I want him to end up at the lab. And so what I notice is that for any cell adjacent to the lab, so the thing to notice is that this particular cell had just one adjacent cell which is free other than the lab, right? And if I try to command him to go to that free cell, then he will not go to that free cell, and then there is just the lab to go, right? So for any cell which is adjacent to the lab, the required condition is that there should be less than or equal to one adjacent cells that are free, right? Yeah. So obviously if I make no cells which are free, that is, if I make this cell blocked as well, then again I can command him to go anywhere. Like I can command him to go up, and he will only have the lab to go, right? So the number of free cells adjacent to any adjacent cell to the lab should be less than or equals to 1. I mean, obviously I am talking about the cells excluding the lab, right? So there should be less than or equals to 1 adjacent cells excluding the lab. Great. So now I know the condition for a cell to be a winning cell. A winning cell is the cell such that if I start at the cell, I can force the robot to move into the lab. So for any cell which is adjacent to the lab, the condition for it to be winning is that all of it's that it should have like less than or equals to 1 adjacent cells which are blocked, which are free. And let's try to generalize this condition. And the general condition is, so the general requirement is, for any starting cell, the number of adjacent cells which are free and are not winning should be less than or equal to 1. And if that is the condition, then obviously that particular starting cell is good. And the reason for that is that if the number of cells which are adjacent to it and are not winning but are free is 1, then I can just command it to go to that cell, and it will not go to that cell, and then it is left to only go to winning cells, right? And if it goes to a winning cell, then it automatically becomes a winning cell, right? So yeah, the general requirement is that for any starting cell, if the number of adjacent cells which are free but are not winning cells, that should be less than or equals to 1. If that is the case, then that particular cell is a winning cell. And if that particular cell is a winning cell, then I can just move on to that one adjacent cell which was not winning and determine if that particular cell is a winning cell or not. So the basic idea is that we can do a graph traversal to find out all the winning cells. I hope you get the idea. So the idea is that if a particular cell is a winning cell, then the condition for that is that it will have either one cell which is not yet a winning cell and all the other cell are winning cells, or either blocked cells. So then I'll just go to that one cell which is not a winning cell and try to determine whether it is a winning cell or not. And I can just do that using a graph traversal, a simple DFS. And this is the basic idea for this problem. And it will be much more clear if we have a look at the code. So let's have a look at the code. So what I'm doing here is that I'm creating a visited array where visited of ij denotes whether a cell is winning or not. And yeah, so basically then what I'm doing is I am first of all taking the input and I'm finding out the cells where the lab is, and that cell is lab x and lab y. Obviously the lab is itself winning because I'm already at the lab, so visited of lab x lab y will be true. Then what happens is that I try to go to all the adjacent cells of the lab and try to start a DFS from that. And to do that, first of all, this is a pretty standard DFS in a grid. I take two arrays where these are storing the directions from where I can go. So for a particular cell ij, I can go to I plus x of j plus y, j plus y of. So for a particular cell I comma j, I can go from I to I plus x of k and j plus y of k. So this is pretty standard stuff. So what's happening is that my new x is lab x plus xi and my new y is lab y plus yi. And if that particular adjacent cell to the lab is not yet visited and it's not yet blocked, I will try to do a DFS from that cell. And using this, I will calculate my answer. And now let's see what the DFS is looking like. So for a particular cell, first of all, I determine whether it is a winning cell or not. And to do that, I count the number of neighboring cells which are not blocked and are not winning cells. And so if a cell is visited, that means it's winning. So I count the cells which are not visited, that is are not winning and are not blocked. And if that count is less than or equal to 1, then that means my cell is also winning. So I just say that answer of my particular cell is going to be plus and visited of my particular cell is going to be true. And then I try to go to all the 4 adjacent cells and I try to find that one cell where I incremented my count, if at all I did. And if that cell is found, I try to do a DFS from that cell to determine whether that particular cell is winning or not. And using this, I can just keep doing this, and then I will surely get my answer. So yeah, finally I'll just output all the answer values as required in the problem. So yeah, this completes the solution to problem E, and this is all that I had for today. So thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in the next one.